We're all Amish now. That's quite a phrase. It topped up in an article after the Mahmoud v. Taylor ruling.
Yeah.
And our sources today suggest that comment, maybe a bit snarky, actually points to something pretty serious happening, sort of a quiet dismantling of public education.
That's right. So today we're doing a deep dive into how, according to these sources, a really coordinated legal and, well, legislative strategy is kind of unraveling the whole idea of shared public schooling.
And it's often framed, isn't it, in terms of parental rights or religious liberty.
Exactly. We've got a whole stack of material here detailing this campaign that's apparently been going on for decades. We're talking tax credits, court cases, ideological shifts.
Okay, so our goal here is to really unpack this structural change, understand where it came from, and I guess most importantly, look at what it might mean for education, for all kids, especially the ones these analyses see as most vulnerable. All right, let's start with the legal core of this. How did we get from, say, a specific religious exemption for the Amish to something that sources suggest might be a blueprint for, well, everyone?
Okay, yeah. So the sources often point back to Wisconsin v. Yoder. That was 1972.
Right.
The Supreme Court said Amish parents could pull their kids out of high school for religious reasons. But, and this is key, it was framed as a really narrow thing.
Like just for them.
Yeah, exactly. A specific sort of self-contained community, deep religious tradition, all that. But even then, there were warnings. Justice Douglas, in his dissent, basically said, hang on, the child's interests aren't automatically the same as the parents'. He was worried about the child's future, their, opportunity to be heard.
Okay, so that was Yoder. But now, fast forward to Mahmoud v. Taylor. That's where things really seem to shift, according to the sources.
That's the argument, yeah. Mahmoud v. Taylor takes that Yoder logic and, as one source puts it, it's sort of metastasized.
Emphasizes, wow.
Yeah. What was narrow becomes potentially a universal entitlement. The big change they highlight is this. Now, just mere exposure to ideas that conflict with a parent's faith, that's seen as a constitutional violation.
Not forced participation, just seeing something different.
Exactly. Not indoctrination, just encountering difference. And the critics argue this flips the First Amendment. Instead of protecting pluralism, it becomes a, quote, sword to destroy it.
How so?
Well, it empowers objectors to dictate what happens in the classroom for everyone, essentially letting them erase difference. And unlike Yoder, where the kids left school,
right,
Mahmoud allows parents to keep kids in school but reshape the curriculum for everybody there. Justice Sotomayor warned about this, basically saying the court had never held that mere exposure was a First Amendment claim and it could cause chaos for schools.
So, connecting back, what does this mean for the child? You mentioned Justice Douglas's warning earlier.
Yeah, the analysis is that Douglas's fear is kind of becoming policy now. That concern about stunting a child's future, limiting their exposure to, different ideas and people, that's becoming normalized, according to this view. The student's right to explore, to question, it's potentially sacrificed for adult comfort or ideology.
So if Yoder opened a door,
Mahmoud, one source says, has blown it off its hinges. It threatens pluralist education, potentially reducing classrooms to these curated enclosures.
And the kids just become extensions of their parents' ideology.
That's the concern articulated in the sources, yeah. Less about individual learning in a shared space, more about reflecting parental beliefs.
Okay, so while the courts are shaping the ideology, the legislature is building the plumbing, maybe.
Yeah.
Let's talk H.R. 1.
Right. H.R. 1, or what was called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, buried inside the tax part of that, the sources say, is basically a federal school voucher system.
But it's disguised.
Yeah, it's framed as a tax credit. So individuals, corporations, they can donate to these things called scholarship granting organizations, SGOs, and get a 100% federal tax credit back, dollar for dollar.
100%.
Yep. And that money funds K-12 scholarships. But here's the kicker the sources emphasize. The money never touches the public purse.
What does that mean exactly?
It bypasses federal tax revenue completely. It goes straight from the donor to the SGO. And these SGOs, the sources point out, aren't elected. They aren't transparent. They're not really accountable to the public.
And the scholarships, what can they be used for?
Private school tuition, homeschooling, religious teaching, tutoring, curriculum. Pretty broad.
And what about rules for the schools getting the money?
That's a major point of concern in the readings. Basically, none. No requirement to follow the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act idea, no obligation to take students with disabilities, no real guardrails against exclusion, as one source puts it.
Okay. And what about somewhere like California? Is this happening there?
Not yet. The state hasn't opted into this specific federal scheme, so it's still theoretical there. But the structure's built, the invitation's out, and the prediction is, if it comes, it'll be sold as innovation options.
Not as this bigger ideological shift we're discussing.
Right.
Which brings us to the big question. Who actually benefits from this?
Yeah.
It sounds like choice, but is it, according to the sources?
Well, one source called it flat out class warfare in disguise.
Oof, why?
Because to use the tax credit, you need cash on hand to donate first, right?
Yeah.
And you need enough income that you actually itemize your deductions.
So not everyone can do that.
Exactly. The analysis says it's mainly viable for the upper middle class and the wealthy, people who often already use private schools. They just get a tax break now for doing it.
And for working class families.
For them, the sources argue there is no choice here. It just acts as a sorting mechanism. It potentially starves the public system while giving tax breaks to those who leave it.
So it's described as a kind of redistribution.
Yeah, from the common to the private, from solidarity to selection, from obligation to opt out. That's how one piece puts it.
And the empowerment language.
Seen as cynical by these critics, like asking families to, quote, celebrate their own exclusion.
Okay, let's zero in on these SGOs, the scholarship granting organizations. The sources raise flags about oversight, even calling it a grift. Can you unpack how they operate?
Sure. This grift idea stems from how they're set up. They're presented as, charitable middlemen.
Right.
But they can actually be run directly by the private or religious schools themselves. The requirements are pretty minimal.
Which creates a kind of feedback loop.
That's the critique. Tuition gets subsidized, but not really by charity, by tax dollars that, again, never hit the public books.
Are there rules against, helping specific kids or helping themselves?
Technically, yeah. No earmarking for specific students, no self-dealing. But the sources call these rules thin scaffolding, easily gamed. There are ways around it, like priority clauses favoring existing students, and nothing stops ideological self-dealing.
And oversight. Who's watching them?
That's the crux of it. Almost none, according to the readings. They're exempt from public records laws. They have unelected boards. They aren't subject to IDEA or civil rights enforcement like public schools are.
So they don't have to report on students with disabilities, or language access, or discrimination.
Nope. Don't have to say how many kids with disabilities they serve or how many get pushed out. No requirements for linguistic access, gender inclusion, anti-discrimination. None of that applies in the same way.
Wow. And what about the money itself? They give 100% out as scholarships.
No, they only need to spend 90% on scholarships. The other 10%, which can be millions, they can keep for administrative costs.
With no real oversight on that 10%.
Virtually none, the sources say. No transparency, no public accountability. So the conclusion drawn is that it's a privatization pipeline disguised as charity.
Public money funding private, sometimes exclusive, schools.
Pretty much. The donor pays nothing extra. The family might pay nothing if the scholarship covers it. The government collects less tax. But the ideological payoff, as one source puts it, is immense.
There's a comparison made to contract prisons.
Yeah, that analogy comes up. Publicly funded, privately run, and, critics argue, structurally incentivized to exclude the difficult or expensive cases. It's framed as exclusion by design, hollowing out public responsibility, replacing it with private choices.
Okay. Now, often when these voucher ideas come up, the defenders point to charter schools. See? School choice works. But your sources say this is misleading.
Very much so. They draw a really sharp line. Charter schools are still fundamentally public schools.
How so?
They're funded with public money, they're free to attend, and they have some state oversight, even if it's debated how much. Legally, they can't turn kids away based on disability, religion, or family status. They can't make enrollment conditional on agreeing with certain beliefs.
Okay, acknowledging charters have their own controversies.
Right. Issues like, soft exclusion or impacting district budgets exist. But the analysis stresses they're still tethered to the public system. Vouchers are not.
And vouchers, especially this HR1 type.
They fund private institutions, selective ones, schools that are legally allowed to exclude kids based on disability, gender identity, grades, family background, you name it. They don't have to follow IDEA or state curriculum laws.
So the charter school comparison is
a straw man, according to these sources. using a different kind of school model to distract from what they see as the real goal here, exit, getting around the obligations of shared public education.
So this isn't about choice. It's about secession. That's a quote you mentioned.
Yeah, a stark one.
Mm-hmm.
Another source describes it as building an ideological gulch, but funded by diverting public tax money, not private business.
This really feels like part of a much bigger, longer strategy when you put it all together. The sources talk about a long march.
Absolutely. This isn't something that just sprang up recently. The sources trace it back more than 50 years. A tightly coordinated network, think tanks, legal groups, funders, media arms on the far right.
Where did it start?
One key moment often cited is 1974. The Heritage Foundation got involved in that textbook dispute in Kanawha County, West Virginia. It actually got violent.
Wow.
And Heritage apparently saw it as a, quote, growth opportunity, a chance to harness and weaponize parental fear, religious nationalism, and white grievance.
And there's a playbook.
That's the argument. You cultivate outrage, you escalate conflict, and then you provide the legal and policy tools to lock in the backlash.
Can you trace that playbook forward?
The sources do. They draw lines from, say, Alice Moore back then to figures like Ron DeSantis today with curriculum gag orders. From the Kanawha violence to the anti-DEI language you find in bills like H.R. 1 now, it's seen as the same pattern, refined over time.
Who are the key players driving this, according to the materials?
Several names come up repeatedly. The Federalist Society is often described as the judicial arm shaping the courts.
Okay.
And the Alliance Defending Freedom, the ADF, is painted as a major legal enforcer, a huge operation, like $100 million a year, pushing what the sources call Christian nationalist policy.
And these groups work together.
Oh, yeah. The sources stress the coordination, they cross-pollinate, share model legislation, groom judges, back candidates for state houses, and even local school boards. It's described as an ideological machine with multiple levers.
What are those levers?
You've got legislation bills that critics say look like photocopied blueprints for theocracy. You have litigation, those carefully picked test cases like 303 Creative, Dobbs, Mahmoud, designed to chip away at existing laws and rights.
Right.
Then the judiciary itself, getting judges appointed for life via that Federalist Society pipeline. And finally, budgets, hiding things in spending bills that defund public services while protecting wealth.
And this leads to something called Project 2025.
Yeah, Project 2025 is framed in some of these analyses as the kind of final phase.
Final phase. What does that mean?
It's described as aiming for state capture at scale. The plan reportedly involves having 50,000 vetted loyalists ready to deploy across the federal government, purging career staff, and installing ideological replacements.
You're specifically targeting.
Education is a big one. Banning DEI, defunding public schools, eliminating Head Start. Those are specific goals mentioned in the sources analyzing the project. It's compared to the Orban model of power seen in Hungary.
So the takeaway from the sources is this is deliberate.
Very much so. Not random, not incompetence. It's presented as the result of 50 years of planning a long war against democracy disguised as policy.
Okay, so if this structure, this scaffolding, is being put in place,
Right.
what's the future look like? What kind of education system do these sources foresee?
They paint a picture of what one calls a brutal binary, basically a two-tiered system.
Tier 1.
That's the curated experience for the children of the elite. Private schools, homeschooling pods, shielded from oversight, focused on teaching, ideology and obedience rather than critical inquiry, according to the critiques.
And Tier 2.
That's the hollowed-out public schools, stripped of money, staff, resources. They become, in this view, containment zones, places for the poor, kids with disabilities, racialized kids, queer kids. Not places for growth, but just warehousing.
That's a grim outlook.
It is. The implication drawn is no space for neurodivergent minds, no space for trans bodies, no room for anyone who doesn't fit a narrow mold.
And school choice in that picture becomes
A euphemism for structural abandonment, according to these analyses, making the dismantling sound like liberty while leaving vulnerable kids behind. It's not seen as fixing education, but extracting from it and just walking away.
the consequences laid out here are, well, profound.
They really are. The sources connect the dots. If public schools crumble, what happens to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA? And if IDEA goes, could the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, be next? Are basic rights for access and inclusion just going to become optional extras, things you only get if you can afford them, or if you fit in?
The sources are pretty blunt about the lack of protections in these alternative systems.
Extremely blunt. Vouchers carry no rights. Tax credits carry no protections. Scholarships are not shields. They state clearly that private schools can reject your child.
For needing too much help.
Yeah.
For who they are.
Yeah. For needing support, for who they love, their gender identity, their religion or lack thereof. And the sources say they do. Every day. Quietly. Legally.
So the ultimate argument presented is, this isn't about helping parents.
The conclusion drawn is that it's about letting the state off the hook, exiting its responsibility, shrinking the public sphere until only shadows and shell corporations remain.
The final assessment is pretty stark. Eugenics by policy, privatization by stealth, and exclusion by design.
That's the bottom line presented in several of these analyses, yes.
It's a lot to take in. The picture painted by these sources, this trajectory, it raises fundamental questions about education, access, inclusion. As we wrap up, thinking about this potential brutal binary, what should people listening consider if they want to engage with these issues?
Well, the sources themselves often end with a call to awareness and action. First, just naming it. Recognizing the patterns, understanding the mechanisms, the SGOs, the tax credits, the legal shift.
Seeing behind the rhetoric of choice.
Exactly. Refusing that framing, as one source puts it. Pulling back the curtain on the shell games. And then the suggestion is often about organizing, educating others, demanding transparency, and advocating for a public system that truly aims to serve all children with all their differences and needs. The sense of urgency is palpable in these writings. There's still time, they suggest, but perhaps not much.